Today's video, CSV file, PowerShell, MySQL. Let's move some data. Hey there, this is Tom with Tom's Tech Show, and today we're going to be taking a CSV file and importing that into MySQL using PowerShell. Now you can take and use a tool like Heidi SQL and go just tools, import CSV, but we would have to be here, load the file, and do all that. So you might want to be able to do this automatically, have something that checks if a file exists and then goes and grabs that file and imports it into and moves the data into MySQL so you can do other things. Okay, so I started with a database and I dumped all of the data, and now I've gone and so now it's just a CSV file. So we can do this in either of two ways to get field names, right? So we know, because that's one of some of the challenges are, what's the name of the field you want to put this data into? Number two, what type of field is that data? Is it text? Is it date? Is it a number? Is it a real number or integer? What is that? Okay, so I've taken this and I've added at the top of this file a set of names. So the first is you have name, access level, login date, and then a group number, just kind of a generic group number, all made up data, but still valid here. So we can do it that way. We can add it at the top, or if we want to, in my script, I'll show you how you can define it as you go if you know what the fields are. So you need to know what data you're bringing in, unless you want to write a huge algorithm to go and try and determine what those data records are. But this is just going to be a simple, let's bring the data in, I know what I'm getting, check. Okay. All right. So some of the things that I'm going to do, of course, is first thing we have to import our MySQL module. I have a video on how to load the MySQL module and be able to connect to the database, and that's this top part, getting our password and everything else. So I added there are a few flags up here on the top, whether this CSV file includes the field names, whether we want to create a new table. So maybe we want to create a new table when this comes in. So that's what right here, if you look at my my database test, it has no tables underneath it. There's no tables. So we're going to create the table on the fly. Okay, so create new index. This will create a auto increment key at the beginning if you want. If you don't want that, flip that to false. Then I can manually place a field name list. So here's name, access, login, date and time, group, number, and so I can do it either way. So if it includes field names, it's going to use those. If I say no, then it's going to use this as my field name group. Okay, so my table that I'm going to create is going to be called CSV test, and the data file we're going to be reading from is datafile.csv. Okay, and to get the file is pretty simple. We just do get content path CSV file. There is another flag here if it's a large file. I do believe it's a stream. So you can tell it to be a stream if it's a large file, and then that will help it navigate and move down the file as it goes. Or if it's too large and you have problems, you might break the data up into a couple different smaller files. Okay, so first thing we want to do is, okay, so we have data, we have it in our variable here. I want to create a new table. I want to see, do I need to have someplace to put this file? And I've told it here, create new table in my settings here that I have on top. So I got create new table, yes. Okay, so then I build the MySQL create table based on what data we have. So, some of the things are create table with the table name. If I wanted an index, if that was set to true, then it's going to create and add the index field. Then here's where we get to a point where we're going to start splitting some of the data up. So the field names, if I included the field names, then I'm going to take that off of the first row, and you do your data brackets 0, so that gets you the first record, first row of data, and we do dot split after the end of it, and then in quotes we do the comma. Now if this were quote and comma, you could do quote commas around it like that, and then that would be looking and splitting it based on that. Or if you're just doing, if it's mixed, you'll have to go and find where there's, add some code to find where there's quotes on the beginning and ending of different variables. If you have numbers and dates and some have quotes and some don't, you can split it with the comma and then come back later and see, is the first character a quote and the last character a quote? Well, let's trim those, and then you actually end up with the value after that. Okay. So if I'm not including my field names in the data, then I just use the field names from my list up here that I created. In this case, I did include the field names, so that's fine. So then I'm going to come down and I'm going to go through these field names. So in PowerShell, if you take and do for each, you can have it automatically kind of split in a loop. So I say for each field in field name. So that's going to iterate through all of the values in the field names array that we've created. Then I do this field type and I split it on my underscore. So if you notice up here where there's an underscore here and an underscore here. So every single one of those, when it hits that, it's going to split off this type. So when I come down to create the fields, if this switch type, based on the field type 1, so what it's going to do is when it gets there and it splits it, right, it's going to say this is going to be the 0 index is going to be login, and the 1 index is going to be the DT. Now when I come down here to create my record entries for the MySQL create table, I can say if it's DT, then I'm going to do this. I'm going to create my SQL, and it's going to be date time format. If it's NO, then I'm going to say, okay, well, that's going to be this, and it's going to be integer format. Otherwise, just do the default, which is typically text fields, and write that out. And then if create index is true, we have to add this to the bottom, create the primary key, and then finally, set our character set and stuff on the bottom, and then we actually invoke that, and that goes out and creates our table. So this top part of the code here, this is just set up to create the table. So now that we have the table created, we've used the top row of data. So now we're going to start, so that top row, so if I have to come here to know where to start my data. If my included field names is true, then I'm going to start at 1. If my included field names was not true, then we're going to start at 0. So then so I'm just going to do a for loop, and I'm just going to iterate through all of those records, right? So I'm going to do I equals start, which is going to be either the 1 or 0. If it's less than my CSV data count, so that's a count of all the records, and then if I had taken away the first record for the field names, then I'm going to want to remove that from the number of records that I'm going to process, and then just continue to iterate through those. And then after that, it's just going through building the SQL insert. So we're going to insert into my table name, and then come down here and do the field names and reiterate through, because insert is right, insert into table name, then you list all of the fields in your, update your insert query that you're going to do. And then after we do list all the fields, then we come and do insert, and we do values, and then we come, so it's this side, insert into database, field names, then values, and then the list of values. So it's a little bit different than updating. If you're doing an update, right, that's you're setting your variables in line. This is going to equal that. This is going to equal that. Where insert, I'm taking all this data, putting it in these fields, and then go. Okay, so then we iterate through those. So we're doing kind of the same thing. For each item row, in each of the data. We're going to split those. So we get the whole row of data. Then we're going to split the commas out, so that it separates our data into item. So we'll have an item will be an array. And then of each piece in that array item, we're going to have each piece of data. So it's like a multi-stack here. We have the row of data, then we split that into the individual items, and then we want to process each individual item. And that's my insert SQL data query is going to come out, and we're going to add the data to every single one. And then the other thing, of course, we have to keep track of the comma. So we have the field names. So in this case, we're kind of putting the commas back in. So we have our field names, name, access, login, group number. So I'm going to need to put name, comma, access, comma, login, and group number, comma. So without the comma on the end, because you put the comma on the end, the query is going to fail. So we have to keep track of that. And as long as it's my comma track, as long as it's less than my field count, continue to add the comma. If it gets to be equal it, then we don't want. We want to leave that comma off the end. And we do that the same way for the field names and for the values. I mean, you could potentially just drop that whole row in there. But if it's, quote delimited, but we need to have quotes around the data. So you couldn't do it for the data. You might be able to with the fields, but I did it this way just to make sure that if I had typed in my field names and it was different than what maybe the field name row in the data, then it would always be able to match here down at the end. Okay, so once that's there, we finish our insert query with the close parentheses there, and then I'm going to do a write that insert SQL command, and then we're going to actually invoke that and do the insert. Okay, so let's give this a shot. So right now over here we have test, and there's no data at all. I can refresh, and we have no data. And then we have our data file, which has name, access, login, group number, and our names and data and stuff that we want to put in there. Okay, so in Visual Studio Code, you can hit Control All and hit F8, and then it's going to run our data, run all that code. Okay, so now see, we came up here with two SQL statements, insert into CSV test, and there's my field names, and then there's my values, all quoted off like they should be, and then another insert into and my values. So if I come here and I say, let's refresh, and I come here and I pull this down, there's my table, CSV test, which was created, and here's my values and my index that I wanted to put in there as well. So, okay, well, that's one way to do it. I'm sure other people out there on the internets will have other ways to do it. It was a pretty good exercise running through getting all the increments and everything down. Of course, this code and everything will be up in my Bitbucket account. That's linked at the bottom of this video, and it'll be in just the generic PowerShell folder. There's ones for AWS, there's ones for VMware. This is just in the generic PowerShell folder. All right, so there you go. That's your code, and take it, integrate it into whatever you need to integrate it into, and play with it. If you need any questions or anything about that, go ahead and comment down below. If this helped you, then give me a thumbs up. If you want more videos like this, or videos about movies, kind of TV shows, sci-fi stuff and everything, I do those kind of videos too, and photography. I've been posting some pictures from our Santa Cruz Island trip that we took, and that's up there in Facebook group and stuff like that. And I'm going to move some of that to the tomstechshow.com website as well at some point. So, all right, and that's where you can kind of find all this stuff, is tomtechshow.com, links to the YouTube channel, links to everything else that I do. All right, well, hopefully this helped you out, and thanks for watching. Take care.